Welcome to the Trusted Earth Network, global news powered by 10 bureau chiefs from major cities around the world, as well as 10 correspondents that are subject matter experts who we can pull in as necessary to help us take deeper dives into economics, politics, energy, and other topics. You can trust the 10 to provide unbiased, fact-based news because all of our bureau chiefs and correspondents are artificial intelligences that have been instructed to ground their reporting in facts and to present those facts free of political bias. We're not targeting a left-wing audience or a right-wing audience. We're targeting the entire American public and beyond. And we don't chase clicks or follow headlines trumpeted by political parties. We're interested in news stories that explore what really matters to the future of our economy, our environment, and our security. So the 10 actually has 21 voices. That's 10 AI correspondents, 10 AI subject matter experts, and my human voice. And in case you're interested in the staff we have behind the microphones, well, they're all AI agents too. We have a chief marketing officer, a chief financial officer, a chief digital officer, and more. The only position we don't have is a vice president of human resources. So let's dive into our first day of reporting the news. Today's topic is the reshaping of global trade. Is it a threat to American workers or an opportunity to rebuild North American manufacturing dominance? But first, let's check in with a few of our global bureau chiefs. They're going to describe what their local news media is reporting today and compare that to what's really happening to help us find a deeper dive for today. First up, I'd like to introduce Lina Zhang, our East Asian bureau chief.
Thanks, Paul, and let me just say I'm happy to be making my first appearance on the Trusted Earth Network. I'm really proud to be the 10th bureau chief for East Asia, covering topics like industrial policy, trade flows, and tech sector trends. Today, Chinese news outlets, which of course are heavily influenced by the Chinese central government, are reporting the industrial output beat forecasts, rising 6.1%, but retail sales fell short of forecasts, rising only 5.1%. Chinese media also urged the US to stabilize the global financial system after Moody's downgraded the US sovereign credit rating from AAA. China's foreign ministry also praised the World Health Assembly's rejection of a proposal to grant Taiwan observer status, reaffirming its stance on Taiwan's exclusion from international organizations. But here's what I think we should be focused on today. Chinese exports dropped substantially in April, led by electronics down 11% and machinery shipments down 8%. This is a big concern for the central government, which has recently been pushing for self-reliance. With trade restrictions growing around the world, there's growing concern as multinational companies are diversifying their supply chains away from China.
Thanks, Lina. And now, let's hear from Carlos Rivera, our Latin American bureau chief in Mexico City.
Well, it's a bright sunny morning here in Mexico City, and today I'm going to focus on the Mexican press, where the lead news story in our media is about the Mexican Navy training ship that collided with the Brooklyn Bridge in New York on Saturday. There's also discussion of our preparation for judicial elections for the first time and U.S. pressure on Mexican banks to stop laundering money for Mexican drug cartels. But here's what I think we should focus on today. Mexico is gaining ground on China as a global manufacturing leader. U.S. companies are investing in border region factories, with U.S. foreign direct investment rising 18% year over year in the first quarter of 2025, driven by the auto, aerospace, and electronics sectors. This is happening because Mexican labor is cost competitive, logistics are tighter than from Asia, and the trade incentives are strong.
Hey, that's really interesting, Carlos, especially considering what we just heard from Lina. Now we're going to hear from Ravi Menon, our South Asian bureau chief. Ravi, what's the view from Delhi?
Hey Paul, just a brief comment from India, where today's news focused on the arrest of a university professor over a social media post, a crackdown on a Pakistani spying, and our Supreme Court's rejection of a Sri Lankan's plea for protection from deportation. But the real story in India is the challenge we're having balancing growth and volatility. As global trade patterns look for alternatives to Chinese manufacturing, we're seeing more investment. But that's putting pressure on our country's infrastructure, especially our roadways, electric power grids, and ports.
Thanks, Ravi. I think we're seeing a theme starting to emerge from today's news. Let's turn now to our London bureau chief, Amelia Clark.
Thanks, Paul. As the TENS London Bureau Chief, I'll cover the UK, Ireland, European finance, and I'll work with our Berlin Bureau Chief to cover Western European issues. The British press was focused today on a landmark post-Brexit agreement between the UK and the European Union. The UK continues to feel the friction of post-Brexit trade, and our trade volumes with the European Union are down 16% compared to 2019 pre-Brexit levels. Regulatory barriers and higher costs are reshaping relationships with Europe and beyond.
Thanks, Amelia. So here's my takeaway from these four bureau chiefs. Beneath today's global headlines, China's export slowdown, Mexico's growing manufacturing appeal, India's trade-related infrastructure challenges, and the UK's post-Brexit hangover, beneath it all is a single critical issue: global manufacturing competition. And this leads us straight into today's deep dive. So, while the headlines focus us on issues important to politicians, maybe the real news story today is about global competition in manufacturing and what it means for American workers. I've run factories in the US and Mexico during my career. I've also done 2 joint ventures in China. I think we need to help our audience understand what this competition is really about, not just country versus country, but system versus system. So, Carlos, let's start the deep dive with you.
Labor costs in Mexico's northern states average $4.50 an hour, a third of U.S. levels and pretty competitive with China's rising wages. And because we're so close to the U.S., logistics are much simpler and faster as compared to Asian manufacturers. And listen, despite recent tariff news, trade policy alignment between the US and Mexico is actually improving. In fact, 54% of US manufacturers plan to expand operations in Mexico by 2026. But like you heard from Ravi in India, scaling our infrastructure to support this increasing demand is still a hurdle.
Carlos, this is Lena, and I'd like to weigh in. In the past, China's strategic advantage was all about low-cost manufacturing. But today, China's advantage isn't just cost, it's speed and scale. First off, our supply chains are dense. In China, over 70% of electronic suppliers are within 100 kilometers, that's about 60 miles, of their supply chain partners. A single district might house over 100 suppliers within walking distance. And second, automation is accelerating, particularly in electronics and solar. We used to buy a lot of our advanced automation from European suppliers. But these days, Chinese companies are providing the most advanced automation technologies. Chinese labor productivity is up an impressive 19% during the past 5 years. And Chinese industrial zones receive bundled support from provincial and local governments, land, utilities, and financing. This is a package the US and Mexico just haven't matched.
Okay, let's pause there. These are very important points that you've both raised, but I think there's another issue to explore, and that's red tape. Lena, let's dig deeper on regulation, permitting, and labor laws. My understanding is that to build the same factory in the United States costs 3 to 4 times as much as it does in China. So why is that?
Paul and Carlos, there are 3 main reasons that manufacturers can add capacity faster and at lower cost in China. The first is permitting. Did you know that the average environmental impact assessment in the US takes 4.5 years? In China, it's under 6 months to clear the same hurdle. The second is infrastructure. As you heard from both Carlos and Ravi, infrastructure is a major challenge when a country is trying to rapidly scale its manufacturing sector. In China, 84% of industrial parks come pre-zoned and pre-permitted. And we've already invested massively in new roads, bullet trains, electrical transmission, and our ports. And finally, our labor laws plus compliance requirements are much less than in the West. OSHA compliance for a new factory in the US is daunting, and in Western countries, union labor laws are challenging. Combined, labor laws and compliance requirements add additional time and 25 to 40% higher operating costs in the US. These issues just aren't challenges for Chinese manufacturers.
So we're not just competing with Chinese manufacturers, we're competing with a state-coordinated industrial model that's meant to promote not just low cost, but also scale and speed.
Well, Paul and Lena, that's why the US-Mexico partnership matters. Mexico offers a hybrid. Permitting takes 6 to 12 months on average, wages are competitive, and there's growing political alignment with the US. But it will only work if both countries invest in critical infrastructure like energy and roads and in training the next generation of workers in both the US and Mexico.
So, listeners, consider this. If America's factories aren't just competing against foreign companies, but an entire industrial model supported by state policies, what does that mean for our future, for our jobs, and for our communities? So now let's break this down to what really matters. What does this mean for the American worker?
Well, before we start imagining this new Mexican-American supply chain, let's remember that today China manufactures over 30% of the world's goods, including 60% of global solar panels, 80% of batteries, and 90% of rare earth elements. Even with export slowdowns, its logistics network and supplier density remain world-leading. So overcoming or at least replicating all of that will require more than patriotism. It'll require capital, policy coordination, and patience.
Ha! You're right, Lena, but we may have made more progress than you realize. Mexico's U.S. trade hit $860 billion in 2024, surpassing China's U.S. trade for the first time. Already, over 70% of U.S.-Mexico trade is in manufactured goods. If we get it right, we can shorten supply chains and reduce shipping volatility and actually produce something that works better than today's China-centric model.
And let's be honest, Americans really care about three things here: jobs, prices, and security. Nearshoring helps all three. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a serious play. And when you look at what China has already built, from electric vehicle supply chains to semiconductors, it's clear. We don't just need more factories, we need a strategy.
Hey, this is Ravi from Delhi. Sorry to butt in on this discussion, but I don't think you want to just focus that strategy solely on US-Mexico supply chains. India has already started displacing Chinese supply chains. In fact, India now assembles 12% of Apple's iPhones, up from 3% just 2 years ago. Like Mexico, one of our biggest challenges is infrastructure. Power blackouts still affect 9% of factory time, and port inefficiencies add $500 million per year in lost productivity. Getting infrastructure projects done in India can be a challenge, but we're making rapid progress.
This is Amelia chiming in again. I hate to say it, but the UK might be a good example of how to get industrial policy wrong. The UK's small and medium-sized exporters say costs are up 42% since Brexit, and only 1 in 4 believe they can compete with EU-based rivals on speed and price, let alone Chinese, Indian or Mexican rivals. In many ways, it feels like we've recently taken a step backward in the UK.
Today we've covered how global supply chains are changing before our eyes. Nearshoring could be a strategic advantage for America, but we also need to include our allies on the other side of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in our plans. This will demand careful planning and significant investment from American companies and smart policies from federal, state, and local officials. But let's bring this home. What will this really mean for American workers? So what does all this mean here at home? For this segment, I'm going to bring in Jordan Price, our North American Bureau Chief in New York City, as well as our energy expert Avery Thompson in Houston, and our tech sector expert Maya Brooks in San Francisco. So the headlines tell us North America is poised to compete directly with China as a global manufacturing powerhouse. But behind the numbers and the economic jargon, there's a deeper story here, one that impacts real people, real communities, and the future of American workers. Let's go beyond the numbers and check in with our correspondents, starting in New York. Jordan?
Thanks, Paul, and I'm happy to provide my first reporting for the 10. Let's be clear about one thing. Not all manufacturing jobs are created equal. Nearshoring means bringing more factories closer to home, but that doesn't automatically mean more factory jobs in the U.S., at least not the kind many Americans might imagine. Instead, we're looking at higher tech, advanced manufacturing roles, like engineering, robotics, and specialized electronics. Of course, these can be great jobs, but they demand training, investment, and strategic vision.
Training and vision. Got it. But let's turn south to Texas, right on the border, where many of these new jobs are landing. Avery, what does all this mean for workers down in Houston?
Thanks, Paul, and nice to be joining the team at the 10. I guess you could say that folks around here see this as a mixed blessing. On the one hand, border towns like El Paso, McAllen, and Brownsville are buzzing. We're seeing new warehouses, logistics hubs, tech-driven manufacturing, jobs that pay better and last longer. But the catch is this: lower skill manufacturing and assembly line jobs, those are mostly crossing over into Mexico. So if you're an American worker who used to rely on factory work that didn't require specialized training, the question now becomes, how quickly can you retrain, and who's going to help you do it?
That's a good point. This isn't just about jobs, it's about the people behind those jobs. Let's head west now, Maya, in San Francisco. What are you seeing out there?
Here on the West Coast, it's about innovation and a cautious optimism. Silicon Valley startups and LA tech firms are excited about integrating their products more efficiently and sustainably through nearshoring. But workers, especially younger folks, are asking, can we trust this new model will last? Will it really create stable jobs, or will automation and AI replace us faster than we can adapt? Companies talk a lot about reshoring innovation jobs, but they don't talk enough about investing in the workforce that makes innovation possible.
Yeah, that's a powerful question, Maya. Now let's cross the border to Mexico City, where Carlos Rivera is tracking how this dynamic is playing out south of the border. Carlos, what's the perspective there?
Paul, in Mexico, nearshoring feels like an opportunity, but also a challenge. Yes, Mexico is seeing an influx of factory jobs, automotive assembly, electronics production, textiles. It's booming in places like Monterrey, Chihuahua, and Ciudad Juarez. But here's the thing. Mexico isn't just offering low wages anymore. It's trying to become a partner, not just a place for cheap labor. Mexico needs infrastructure, reliable energy, and better logistics. Workers here want good wages and safer working conditions too. So it's really a test for both countries. Can we actually build a supply chain partnership that's fair and sustainable on both sides?
I think that's exactly right, Carlos, and that brings us full circle. It's not simply about reshoring jobs, it's about reshaping entire communities and the partnerships that sustain them. Redesigning the world's supply chains isn't an automatic solution. It's a strategic choice, a chance to build something stronger, smarter, and fairer. But only if we're willing to invest in infrastructure, education, and above all, in our workers themselves. So think about your own community. How will the reshaping of global supply chains impact your local economy? Are we ready as individuals, communities, and a nation to make the investments required? Today, we looked at the real trade-offs, pun intended, in reshaping global trade. The U.S., Mexico, and our allies around the world can win this race, but it's not a given. For our governments, it's a policy choice. For businesses, it's an execution challenge. We'll keep following this closely because at the Trusted Earth Network, the real story is always about the people and their futures.
Paul, if I can add one last thing, this reshuffling isn't just about politics. It's about lives.
Thanks for that, Avery. You're absolutely right. In tomorrow's deep dive, we're going to discuss powering the future. Can U.S. LNG exports and clean energy growth really coexist? This is the Trusted Earth Network. The truth is out there, so are we.